The laughter was the worst part. Not the wine someone had spilled down the front of her dress. Not the way Lady Ravina had snapped her fingers and pointed at the stain spreading across the silk like a wound, announcing to the entire table that the poor thing clearly did not know how to behave among civilized wolves. Not even the way the hall had erupted in cruel amusement, hundreds of faces turning towards Seren where she stood frozen beside the banquet table, a serving tray still balanced in her trembling hands. No, the worst part was that Caleb did not stop it. The Alpha King of Arendelle sat at the head of the great feasting table, his jaw tight, his silver-flecked eyes fixed on the goblet before him as though the dark wine held answers to questions no one had asked. He did not look at her, did not rise, did not speak a single word in her defense, while the highest-born wolves in the kingdom made sport of the woman he had held in his arms not 6 hours earlier. The woman whose neck still carried the fading warmth of his mouth. The woman who bore his secret claiming mark beneath the dress they were laughing at. Serene set the tray down with careful precision, because if she did not focus on the mechanics of her hands, she would shatter in front of all of them. She had known this would be difficult. Caleb had warned her that the waning moon feast was a political performance, that every noble house would be watching, measuring, calculating. That their bond had to remain hidden until he had neutralized the faction that wanted to control his choice of queen. Just one more moon cycle, he had whispered that morning, his fingers laced through hers in the darkness of the forest chapel where they met in secret. One more, and I will stand before the realm and tell them you are mine, that you have always been mine. She had believed every word. Now she watched him sit in silence while they humiliated her, and something fragile inside her began to crack. The feast had been designed to celebrate the opening of betrothal negotiations. Every eligible daughter from the 6 great houses had been summoned to Arendelle's capital, each one groomed and gowned and positioned like a chess piece on the board of succession. The Alpha King was expected to narrow the field tonight, to show favor, to dance. Serene had no business being in the Great Hall at all. She was a ward of the Lower Keep, an orphan taken in by the castle's herb mistress after her parents had died in the border wars. She possessed no title, no bloodline worth recording, no political value whatsoever. What she possessed was a bond with the Alpha King himself. A bond he had initiated. A bond sealed with teeth and blood and whispered oaths in moonlit clearings where no one could hear them. But tonight, she was simply the girl who carried platters. The humiliation escalated in stages. First, the spilled wine, orchestrated by one of Lady Ravina's attendants, who had bumped Seren's elbow with practiced precision. Then the laughter. Then Ravina herself, rising from her seat with the languid grace of a woman who had spent her entire life being told she was destined to be queen. "Someone fetch the poor creature a mop," Ravina announced, her voice carrying across the hall like poisoned honey. "Or better yet, fetch her a mirror, so she can see how utterly out of place she looks." More laughter. Seren's cheeks burned. Her gaze darted to Caleb, pleading, searching for any sign of the man who had pressed his forehead to hers and called her his heart, his breath, his fated one. He lifted his goblet and drank. The dismissal was so absolute, so devastating, that Seren's vision blurred. She blinked rapidly, refusing to let a single tear fall in front of these people. She would not give them that satisfaction. "While we are on the subject of what belongs where," Lord Heron Ashvale said, rising from his seat with a thin smile, "perhaps it is time we discuss the evening's true purpose." He gestured toward the 6 young noblewomen seated in a crescent at the foot of the dais. "My king, the houses have presented their finest. Surely you will honor them with your attention." The hall fell silent. Every eye turned to Caleb. Seren watched his hand tighten around the stem of his goblet. She could feel the bond between them straining, a taut wire vibrating with tension she did not understand. Something was wrong. The set of his shoulders was too rigid. His breathing was too controlled, and his eyes, those pale silver eyes that blazed like winter stars when he looked at her, were dull, flat, as though someone had drawn a curtain behind them. Caleb stood. The hall held its breath. Lady Ravina. His voice sounded distant, mechanical, like words being read from a page by someone who did not understand their meaning. Would you honor me with the first dance? It was not a question. Ravina's smile was a blade sheathed in silk. She rose and extended her hand, and when Caleb took it, leading her to the center of the hall where the musicians waited, Seren felt the bond scar ignite with a pain so sharp she nearly doubled over. He had not looked at her once. Not once. The tray slipped from her fingers and shattered on the stone floor, but no one noticed. They were too busy watching the Alpha King dance with the woman they already believed would be his queen. And in the shadows behind the serving arch, Seren pressed her hand to the mark that was searing a hole through her chest and made a decision that would change the course of 2 lives forever. She did not go back to the Great Hall. She moved through the servants' corridors like a ghost, one hand pressed to her ribs where the mark seared her skin, the other wrapped around the small glass vial hidden in the pocket of her ruined dress. The vial she had been carrying for 3 days, waiting for the right moment to show Caleb. The healer's tonic, the one that confirmed what she had suspected for weeks. She was carrying his child. Seren reached her small chamber at the base of the eastern tower and began to gather her things with the numb efficiency of someone whose heart had already made a decision her mind was still catching up to. A change of clothes, her mother's bone-handled comb, the leather journal where she recorded her herb lore, the pouch of dried moon petal and feverfew that would see her through the first months of sickness. She paused at the narrow window. Below, the courtyard blazed with torchlight, and she could hear the distant music of the feast drifting through the cold air. Somewhere in that golden hall, Caleb was dancing with Ravina, smiling for the court, playing the role of a king choosing his future while the woman who already carried his future packed a bag in a room no bigger than a closet. "You will know your father's strength," she whispered, her hand settling over her flat belly. "Even if you never know his name." She pulled her cloak tight and slipped through the servants' gate into the bitter night. She did not see the figure at the high window of the king's tower, a silhouette rigid with sudden horror, hands clawing at the glass as though trying to reach through it. She did not hear the sound that followed her into the darkness, a howl so broken, so raw, that the wolves patrolling the castle walls stopped mid-stride and whimpered in answer. By the time anyone thought to look for the herb mistress's quiet ward, Seren was already gone, and the Alpha King was on his knees, screaming her name into the empty dark. 4 months had passed since the night Seren vanished from Arendelle. She had walked for 11 days through frozen mountain passes and sleeping forests before she found Briar Hollow, a village so small it did not appear on any map she had ever seen. Nestled in a valley between 2 ridges of black stone, it was the kind of place the world had simply forgotten, which made it the perfect place to disappear. She had arrived at the village gates half-starved and shaking, her cloak stiff with frost, her belly just beginning to round beneath her dress. The elder woman who ran the village tavern had taken one look at her and asked no questions. She had simply opened the door wider and said, "You look like you need soup before you need answers." Seren had wept into the bowl. She gave her name as Nell. A widow, she said. A herbalist by trade, seeking a quiet place to raise her child. The village had no healer of its own. The last one had died 2 winters ago. And within weeks, Seren had made herself indispensable. She treated fevers with willow bark and set broken fingers with steady hands. She brewed sleeping draughts for old Marin who suffered nightmares, and made a salve that finally cured the baker's son of the rash that had plagued him since autumn. The people of Briar Hollow came to trust the quiet widow with the sad eyes and the gentle hands. They stopped asking where she came from. They started asking her to stay. But the nights were another matter entirely. Every night, without exception, the claiming scar beneath her ribs burned. It should have faded. Among wolfkind, a rejected bond dissolved within weeks, the mark lightening, thinning, disappearing like a scar exposed to sunlight until nothing remained but smooth skin and the ghost of what might have been. Seren had examined her mark 100 times in the dim light of her rented room above the tavern, pressing her fingers to the raised skin, willing it to fade. It never did. If anything, it darkened. The edges grew sharper, more defined, as though the bond was not dying but deepening, strengthening in his absence rather than dissolving. And sometimes, in the hollow hours before dawn, she felt something pass along the bond that made her breath catch and her hands fly to her growing belly. A presence, vast, furious, desperate, reaching for her across impossible distance like a drowning man clawing towards shore. She told herself it was her imagination, grief playing tricks on a broken heart. But the baby knew. Whenever the mark flared hottest, the child would stir, pressing tiny limbs against her from the inside as though answering a call only it could hear. "Hush, little one," Seren would whisper in the darkness, rocking herself on the narrow bed. "He is not coming for us. Whatever you feel, it is only an echo. That is all." She almost believed it. Almost. Spring crept into Briar Hollow with agonizing slowness, as though even the season was reluctant to disturb the valley's silence. The snow retreated from the lower fields, crocuses pushed through the mud, and Seren's belly grew round enough that the tavern keeper, Odette, had taken to leaving an extra cushion on her chair without comment. It was Odette who brought the first news. She returned from her monthly supply trip to the trading post at Ashenmere with a cart full of flour and salt and a head full of rumors that she could barely contain long enough to unhitch the mule. "The kingdom has gone mad," Odette announced, dropping a sack of grain onto the tavern counter with a thud that made Seren flinch. Absolutely mad. Seren kept her eyes on the poultice she was grinding, her knuckles white around the pestle. "What do you mean?" "The Alpha King." Odette leaned forward, her weathered face alight with the particular excitement of a woman who lived for gossip. "They say he has torn Arendelle apart. Every province, every village. His wolves have been seen as far south as the Thorngate, and as far east as the Salt Flats. He has emptied his treasury offering rewards. He has stripped half his own guard from the capital to send them searching." "Searching for what?" Seren asked, though she already knew the answer. She could feel it in the way the scar beneath her ribs had begun to pulse, a slow, rhythmic heat that matched the cadence of her own heartbeat. "For a woman." Odette's voice dropped to a whisper, as though the wolves themselves might be listening. "No one knows who she is. Some say she is a spy who stole state secrets. Others claim she is a witch who cursed the king and fled before he could bring her to justice. But the traders at Ashenmere, they had a different story." Seren's hands stilled on the mortar. "What story?" "They say the king is not angry. They say he is broken." Odette paused, and something shifted in her expression. The gossip giving way to something more sober. "They say he has not slept in 4 months, that his wolf is fighting him for control every waking hour, that he has been seen walking the castle corridors at night, talking to someone who is not there, calling a name no one recognizes." The pestle slipped from Seren's fingers and clattered against the stone counter. "The crops are dying in the western provinces," Odette continued, not noticing Seren's reaction. "The herds are scattered. The feral wolves that used to stay deep in the ashwood have started coming down to the valley roads, attacking travelers in broad daylight. The traders say it is because the king's bond is broken, that the land feels what the Alpha feels. And the Alpha feels nothing but rage and grief." Seren bent to retrieve the pestle, using the motion to hide her face. Her hands were shaking. The claiming scar burned so fiercely she had to bite the inside of her cheek to keep from gasping. He was searching for her. 4 months, and he was still searching. Why? The question clawed at her with talons she could not escape. Why would Caleb destroy his own kingdom looking for a woman he had publicly discarded? Why would his wolf fight him for control over a bond he had chosen to break? Unless the bond had never been broken at all. Unless something else had happened that night. Seren crushed the thought before it could take root. Hope was a weed that grew in poisoned soil, and she had swallowed enough poison to last a lifetime. "The affairs of kings are far away," she said carefully, straightening up. "We have enough to worry about in Briar Hollow." Odette studied her for a moment, something shrewd flickering behind her eyes. Then she shrugged and went back to unpacking the supplies. That night, Seren lay awake with her hands pressed to her belly, feeling the baby turn and kick against her palms. The child was restless tonight, agitated, moving with a force that seemed impossible for something so small. And the mark was alive again. Not the dull ache she had grown accustomed to, but a sharp, insistent heat that radiated outward from her ribs and settled deep in her bones. Along the bond, she felt him. Not words, not images, just a feeling so raw and vast it stole the air from her lungs. He was closer. She did not know how she knew, but she was certain of it. The distance between them was shrinking, and with every mile he closed, the bond grew louder, more insistent, more impossible to ignore. "Stop," she whispered to the darkness, to the mark, to the man who could not hear her. "Please stop looking. You chose this. You chose her. Let me go." The mark flared in answer, a pulse of heat so fierce it brought tears to her eyes. He was not going to stop. And deep down, in the part of her heart she had tried so hard to bury, Seren was not sure she wanted him to. The rider arrived in Briar Hollow 3 days later. Seren heard the hoofbeats from inside the tavern and knew, with a certainty that bypassed logic entirely, that they had come for her. The mark told her. It sang against her ribs with a vibration she had never felt before. Not pain, not warmth, but recognition. As though the bond itself was saying, "Finally." She was standing behind the counter when the tavern door opened and a woman stepped through. Tall, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped auburn hair and a scar that ran from her left temple to the corner of her jaw. She wore the dark leather of the king's inner guard, but she carried no visible weapon. Her amber eyes swept the room and locked onto Seren with the precision of an arrow finding its target. "Mistress Nell," the woman said. It was not a question. "Who are you?" Seren's voice was steady, but beneath the counter her hand had closed around the handle of a paring knife. "My name is Dareth. I am shield captain to the Alpha King." The woman's expression softened by a fraction. "And I have been searching for you for 119 days. You have the wrong person. You are Seren, ward of the herb mistress Helwyn, formerly of Arendel's lower keep. You bear the king's claiming mark on your left side, beneath your ribs, and you carry his child." Dareth's gaze dropped briefly to Seren's belly. "Though, from the look of things, that last detail will not remain a secret much longer." Seren's grip tightened on the knife. "How did you find me?" "The bond. The king feels your direction like a compass needle. Every day he gets closer. I rode ahead because there are things you need to hear before he arrives, things that will change what you believe happened at the waning moon feast." Dareth pulled a chair from the nearest table and sat without invitation. "May I speak plainly?" "You seem to be doing so already." A ghost of a smile crossed the shield captain's scarred face. "He did not betray you, Seren." The night of the feast, someone introduced a compound into the king's wine, a blend of wolfsbane and silverthorn root, refined to suppress the wolf entirely. It severed his instincts, his bond awareness, his ability to feel you through the mark. He was conscious but hollowed out, a puppet going through motions he could not control or remember. The paring knife slipped from Seren's fingers and clattered to the floor. He woke 2 days later in his chambers with Ravina standing over him, already referring to herself as the future queen. He remembered nothing. The first word he spoke was your name. Seren gripped the edge of the counter to keep herself upright. The room was tilting. The bond scar was alight beneath her skin, and through it she could feel something pouring toward her like floodwater through a broken dam. Anguish, fury, and a longing so immense it made her knees buckle. Who? She managed. Who did this? Dareth's expression hardened to iron. House Ashvale. Lord Heron and his daughter Ravina. They have been engineering this for years. The compound, the humiliation at the feast, the dance. All of it was staged to drive you away and position Ravina as the only viable queen. Dareth reached inside her coat and withdrew a folded letter, its seal broken but still bearing the Ashvale crest, a silver hawk clutching a serpent. We intercepted this from a courier 2 weeks ago. Read it. Seren took the paper with numb fingers. The message was 3 lines long. The herbalist has been located in the northern valleys. Send the quiet ones. The king must never find her alive. The letter fell from Seren's hands like something venomous. Assassins, she breathed. Dareth nodded. And they are already closer than you think. The first arrow came through the tavern window before Dareth finished speaking. It buried itself in the wooden beam 6 inches above Seren's head, the shaft still vibrating with the force of impact. Seren saw the dark liquid glistening on the arrowhead, thick, oily, wrong, and understood immediately. Nightbloom extract, a poison that could kill a shifted wolf in under a minute. They were not here to capture her. They were here to make sure she stopped breathing. Dareth moved with a speed that seemed impossible for someone her size. One hand seized Seren's arm while the other flipped the heavy tavern table onto its side, creating a barrier between them and the broken window. A second arrow punched through the tabletop and stopped 3 inches from Seren's face, its poisoned tip glistening in the firelight. How many? Seren gasped. I counted 6 on the eastern ridge. There will be more in the trees. Dareth drew a short blade from inside her coat. The quiet ones work in packs of 12. They are not wolves. They are humans trained specifically to kill our kind. Wolfsbane-coated weapons, nightbloom poison, silver wire. They know exactly what hurts us. A crash from the back of the tavern. The kitchen door splintered inward and a figure in mottled gray stepped through, a crossbow leveled at Seren's chest. Dareth's blade left her hand before Seren could scream. It caught the assassin in the shoulder, spinning him sideways. His crossbow bolt went wide, smashing a row of glass bottles on the shelf behind them. Move! Dareth commanded, hauling Seren toward the narrow staircase that led to the rooms above. We need higher ground. They scrambled up the stairs as the tavern below erupted into chaos. Through the window of her small rented room, she could see gray-clad figures flowing between the village buildings like smoke, converging on the tavern from every direction. Your guards! Seren panted, one hand braced against the wall, the other cradling her belly. Where are your guards? I came alone. I rode ahead of the king's forces precisely because a column of wolves would have drawn the quiet ones sooner. Dareth barricaded the door with the heavy oak dresser, her jaw tight. Reinforcements are a day behind me. Perhaps less, if the king felt the bond spike when that arrow came through the window. A day? Seren stared at her. We do not have a day, we do not have an hour. Then we survive until dawn. Dareth pressed a second blade into Seren's hand. Silver-edged. It will wound anything human or wolf. An explosion of glass from the hallway. 2 more gray figures breached the corridor, moving in perfect silence, their weapons raised. Dareth met them with a ferocity that seemed to crack the air. She fought like something between a woman and a storm. Blade in one hand, claws extending from the other as her wolf surged partially to the surface. The first assassin fell under Dareth's blade before he could raise his weapon. The second drove a silver-tipped spear through her side. Dareth snarled and snapped the spear shaft, wrenching the broken tip free. She staggered, clutching her side, and dropped to one knee. Dareth! Seren lunged forward. Stay back! The shield captain's voice was ragged. Protect the child, nothing else matters. But more shadows filled the stairwell. 3, 4, 5 assassins ascending in formation, their movements coordinated with mechanical precision. Dareth rose to meet them, but she was bleeding badly, her movements slowing, her wolf flickering beneath her skin like a candle fighting the wind. Seren watched the woman who had ridden alone across a kingdom to find her dying on a tavern floor, and something ancient shifted in her chest. Not the mark, not the bond, something deeper. Something that had been sleeping in her blood since the day she was born, waiting for a moment desperate enough to wake it. Her hands began to glow. The light was pale green, not the golden warmth of a healer's gift, but something wilder, colder, laced with the scent of pine forests and frozen earth. It poured from her palms like water, pooling on the floorboards and spreading outward in tendrils that moved with deliberate intelligence. The nearest assassin hesitated. Then he raised his crossbow. Seren thrust her hands forward and the light erupted. It hit the assassin like a wall of solid winter, lifting him off his feet and hurling him backward down the stairwell into his companions. Bodies tumbled. Weapons clattered. The stairwell filled with the sounds of impact and retreat, but the effort cost her. Seren gasped, her vision darkening at the edges, her knees buckling. The baby kicked violently, 2 sharp movements from opposite sides of her belly, and she realized with a shock of terror that the power had not come from her alone. The child had fed it, amplified it, pushed its own nascent magic through her body like lightning through a copper rod. "What are you?" Dareth whispered from the floor, staring at Seren with wide, bloodshot eyes. Seren did not have an answer. She sank to her knees beside the shield captain, pressing her glowing hands to the spear wound, feeling the green light shift and soften into something gentler as it knitted torn flesh and sealed ruptured vessels. Below them, the surviving assassins were regrouping. She could hear them in the ruined tavern, boots crunching on broken glass, voices murmuring in clipped, professional tones. They were not retreating. They were simply recalculating. And then a sound split the night that made every voice fall silent. A howl. Distant but closing fast, deep enough to vibrate in the bones of the building itself. Filled with a fury so absolute, so primal, that the assassins below went completely still. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. He was coming. The wall of the tavern exploded inward. Not the door. Not a window. The wall itself, timber and stone and plaster detonated as something massive crashed through it with the force of a battering ram made of muscle and rage. Dust and debris erupted across the ruined common room, and through the cloud of destruction came a wolf that should not have existed outside of legends. He was enormous, coal-black fur that seemed to swallow the light, eyes that burned not amber but molten white, blazing with a radiance that threw shadows in every direction. His jaws were open, and the sound that poured from his throat was not a growl but a vibration, a frequency that rattled the walls and spoke to the most ancient part of every living creature in that building: run or die. The quiet ones chose to fight. It was the last mistake 5 of them ever made. Caleb moved through them like a storm given form. There was no hesitation, no restraint. An assassin raised a wolfsbane-coated blade and was hurled across the room before the swing could land. Another fired a crossbow bolt that buried itself in the massive wolf's shoulder. Caleb did not slow, did not flinch, simply closed the distance and ended the fight. The survivors broke. They fled through the shattered wall, through the kitchen, through every exit the ruined tavern offered, scattering into the darkness with the blind speed of prey animals who had just discovered they were no longer predators. Silence fell, thick, ringing. absolute. The great wolf stood in the wreckage of the common room, his breath coming in huge, shuddering gasps, his body bearing the marks of battle. His blazing eyes swept the room, searching, searching, and then lifted to the top of the staircase, where Seren stood with her hands still faintly glowing and tears cutting tracks through the dust on her face. The wolf made a sound. Not a growl, not a whimper. Something between and beyond both. A broken, aching note that carried 4 months of agony in a single breath. He shifted. The wolf dissolved, and a man knelt in the rubble, bare-shouldered and bleeding and shaking. Caleb looked up at her from the ruins of the tavern floor, and the Alpha King of Arendelle was weeping. "You are alive." His voice cracked on every syllable. "You are alive, and I am not too late." Seren descended the stairs slowly. Each step felt like crossing a border, away from the version of herself who had spent 4 months learning to live without him, towards something she was not sure she could survive a second time. Dareth limped past her with quiet discretion, descending to secure what remained of the tavern's ground floor and giving them the only gift a soldier could offer in that moment: privacy. Caleb had not moved from his knees. Someone had thrown a cloak over his shoulders. Odette, perhaps, materializing from wherever she had hidden during the attack. But he seemed unaware of it. His eyes had not left Seren since the moment he spotted her at the top of the stairs. They tracked her now with the intensity of a man watching the sun rise after a lifetime underground. She stopped 3 paces from him, close enough to see the damage 4 months had carved into his face, the hollows beneath his cheekbones, the dark crescents under his eyes, the way his hands trembled against his thighs, not from cold, but from the effort of holding himself still when every fiber of his being was straining to reach for her. He looked like a man who had been slowly dying, because, she realized with a cold shock, he had been. "You are hurt," she said. The crossbow bolt was still embedded in his shoulder, and the wound had not yet begun to close. "It does not matter." "You have a bolt in your shoulder, Caleb." "It does not matter." His voice was raw, stripped of every pretense of authority. "Nothing matters except that you are standing in front of me and breathing." His gaze dropped to her belly, round and undeniable beneath her dress. His breath caught. A sharp, involuntary sound, as though someone had driven a fist into his stomach. "Seren," he whispered. "Is that... Are you..." "Yes." The word fell between them like a stone into still water. She watched the ripples cross his face. Shock, wonder, anguish, joy. Each one fighting the others for dominance. His hand rose toward her belly and then stopped, hovering in the air between them, and she saw his fingers curl inward, retreating. He was afraid to touch her. The Alpha King, who had just torn through a building and defeated 5 assassins single-handedly, was afraid to touch the woman carrying his child. "May I?" he asked. And something inside Seren broke open. She took his hand and pressed it flat against the curve of her stomach. The baby responded instantly. A hard, decisive kick directly against his palm, followed by a second from the opposite side. Caleb made a choked sound. His other hand came up to cradle her belly, both palms spread wide, feeling the movements with an expression of devastated wonder. "There are 2, Seren said quietly. "The midwife thinks twins." A sob escaped him. Just one, brief, ragged, bitten off, but it broke the last of Seren's composure. Tears spilled down her cheeks, hot and relentless, and she hated them. She did not want to cry. She wanted to be furious. She wanted the armor she had spent 4 months forging to hold. She stepped back, pulling away from his hands. The warmth vanished. The cold rushed in. "Don't." Her voice came out raw. "Don't kneel there looking at me like that. Not after what happened." "Seren, I was drugged. Dareth told you. I swear on..." "I know what Dareth told me," The words cut through his like a blade. And maybe it is true. Maybe every word of it is true. But you need to understand what that night did to me, Calum. You need to understand what it felt like to stand in that hall with your mark burning on my skin and your child growing inside me while they poured wine down the front of my dress and called me a dog who did not know her place. Calum flinched as though she had struck him. I looked at you, Seren continued, and now the fury was rising, molten and unstoppable, fed by 100 sleepless nights and 1,000 silent conversations with a man who was not there. I looked right at you, and I begged you with my eyes to say something, to do anything, to give me the smallest sign that I was more to you than a convenient secret you kept in the basement of your castle. You were never, and you lifted your goblet and drank. Her voice broke. You drank, Calum, while they tore me apart. You sat there and drank. The silence that followed was the loudest sound in the room. Calum rose slowly from his knees. He was trembling. Not the controlled shaking of a man in pain, but the full-body tremor of someone whose foundations had been pulled out from under him. You think I do not know? His voice came out in a whisper that built, word by word, into something raw and terrible. You think I have not lived with that image every single day? The moment I woke, and the memories began to surface? Fragments, pieces, shards of a night I had no control over. The first thing I saw was your face. Your face, Seren, looking at me from behind a serving tray, waiting for me to save you. And I sat there like a hollow puppet and did nothing. He stepped toward her. She held her ground. Do you know what it is like to betray the person you love most and have no memory of choosing to do it? To know that your body was used as a weapon against your own mate? I cannot even apologize properly, because the man who hurt you was not me. He wore my face and used my voice. But I was not in that hall. I was nowhere. I was nothing. His voice cracked, and Seren saw it again. The vulnerability that had undone her at the top of the stairs. Not the Alpha King. Not the ruler who commanded every wolf in 3 provinces. Just a man who had been robbed of his agency and was drowning in the aftermath. I searched every village, Calum said, quieter now. Every road. Every abandoned farmstead and forest camp between the capital and the sea. I did not eat for the first week. I did not sleep for the first month. My advisors told me I was destroying the kingdom. My council threatened to name a regent, and I told them that if a single one of them stood between me and finding you, I would walk through them and keep going. That is not love, Seren whispered. That is obsession. Maybe. He held her gaze without flinching. Or maybe it is what love looks like when someone takes your mate away and leaves you with nothing but a burning mark and the knowledge that she is out there somewhere, alone and pregnant, and believing you threw her away, like she meant nothing. The bond flared beneath her ribs with sudden, searing heat. She gasped and felt what he was feeling. Not the controlled anguish he was showing her, but the raw, howling devastation beneath it. 4 months of it, compressed and concentrated into a single pulse that nearly drove her to her knees. He had been living with this, every moment of every day. While she had been building a quiet life in Briar Hollow, he had been consumed alive. I thought you chose her, Seren choked out. I thought everything we had was a game to you. A king amusing himself with a servant girl before settling down with someone who actually mattered. Calum closed the distance between them. His hands cupped her face, tilting it up, and she could feel the tremor in his fingers, the barely controlled desperation of a man who had crossed a kingdom to stand exactly here. You are the only thing that has ever mattered, he said fiercely. Not the crown, not the kingdom, not the bloodlines or the alliances or the political games that every noble house plays with human lives. You, Seren. You are the reason I have a heartbeat. And if I have to spend the rest of my life proving that, Then that is exactly what I will do. A sob tore from her chest. The walls she had built, the careful, necessary walls that had kept her functional through 4 months of exile, collapsed, not in pieces. All at once, a catastrophic structural failure that left her with nothing between her pain and the open air. Caleb caught her as she broke. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her against his chest, and she could feel his heartbeat slamming against her ear, fast and urgent and real. She fisted her hands in the cloak at his shoulders and held on. I was going to tell you that night, she whispered against his chest. About the baby. I had the healer's tonic in my pocket. I was going to show you after the feast when you came to me. I had practiced the words. His arms tightened around her. Through the bond, she felt something break inside him. A clean, sharp fracture, like ice cracking on a river in spring. And instead, you watched me dance with Ravina, he said hoarsely. Yes. He pressed his face into her hair. I will make this right. I swear on our children's lives, Seren. I will make this right. How? She pulled back to look at him. The Ashvales, Ravina, the court. They will never accept me. They have already sent assassins. They will send more. Caleb's eyes hardened. The vulnerability receded, and for a moment Seren saw the wolf beneath the man. Ancient, patient, and utterly without mercy. Then the Ashvales will learn what happens when you threaten an alpha's mate and his unborn children. His hand settled on her belly. The twins kicked in unison, and Caleb's expression softened, iron giving way to something so tender it made Seren's chest ache. Together? He asked. She looked at him, battered, exhausted, trembling, and saw the truth written in every line of his face. This was not a king reclaiming a possession. This was a man asking to come home. Together, she said. They rode through the night, Seren seated before Caleb on a warhorse the color of smoke, his arm locked around her waist as though releasing her would cause the earth to swallow her whole. Behind them, Dareth rode despite her wounds, flanked by the advance guard of wolves that had been trailing the king's path for weeks. Seren leaned back against his chest and let herself feel the bond for the first time without fighting it. It hummed between them like a plucked string, warm and resonant and alive. Through it, she could sense the steady pulse of his heartbeat, the fierce protectiveness radiating from his wolf, and beneath it all, a fragile, almost childlike relief, as though some part of him still could not believe she was real. Tell me about Briar Hollow, he said into her hair, his breath warm against her temple. So she did. She told him about Odette and her cushions, about old Marin and her nightmares, about the baker's son and the rash, and the way the villagers had stopped seeing a stranger and started seeing their healer. She told him about the nights she spent awake with her hands on her belly, feeling the twins move, wondering if he was somewhere under the same sky. Every night, Caleb murmured. My wolf reached for you every night. When I slept, if I slept, he would push through the bond, trying to find you. I thought I was imagining it. I felt it, Seren admitted. I told myself it was an echo, that it meant nothing. It meant everything. His arm tightened around her. It was the only thing keeping me from going feral. They reached the crest of the White Ridge Pass as dawn bled pink and gold across the horizon. Below them, the capital of Arendelle should have been waking. Smoke rising from hearth fires, the morning bells ringing from the citadel tower, the market squares filling with merchants and tradesmen. Instead, the city was burning. Not in flames, not yet, but smoldering with the evidence of upheaval. Black banners hung from the citadel walls where the royal standard should have been. Barricades blocked the main gates. And on the great tower where Caleb's sigil had flown since his coronation, a different crest now caught the morning wind. The silver hawk of House Ashvale. Dareth brought her horse alongside them, her face gray with pain and fury. They moved faster than we anticipated. How? Seren demanded, staring at the occupied capital. You have been gone barely 2 days. Lord Heron has been positioning for this since the feast. Calem's voice had gone dangerously flat. The drugging, the humiliation, driving you away. It was never just about making Ravina queen. It was about destabilizing me, making me appear unfit, giving the noble houses a reason to support a change in power. A scout materialized from the tree line, running hard, her face slick with sweat. My king, Lord Ashvale declared himself Lord Protector of the realm at midnight. He claims you have abandoned your throne and lost control of your wolf. Lady Ravina has been declared the king's rightful consort. Calem's wolf surged to the surface. Seren felt it through the bond, a wall of black fury pressing against his skin from the inside. There is more, the scout continued, and her voice faltered. They have taken prisoners, servants and guards who refused to kneel. 43 of them, including the herb mistress Helwyn. Seren's blood turned to ice. Helwyn, the woman who had raised her after her parents died, who had taught her every herb and every remedy, who had braided her hair on cold mornings and told her that being common-born did not mean being common. They are to be put to death at sundown, the scout whispered, as traitors to the new order. Seren was off the horse before Calem could stop her, her boots hitting the frozen ground, her hands balled into fists at her sides. The bond blazed beneath her skin with a heat that matched the fury pouring through her veins. We are not waiting. Her voice carried a harmonic she had never heard from her own throat before, something deeper, older, laced with a resonance that made the wolves around her lower their heads instinctively. We go now. We go before sundown. And we bring Helwyn home alive. Calem dismounted and stood beside her, looking down at the occupied city with eyes that burned like white fire. You heard my queen, he said. The wolves began to howl, one voice, then 10, then 50, rising from the tree line and the ridge line, and the pass behind them, building into a chorus that rolled down the mountainside and crashed against the walls of the stolen capital like a wave against stone. The Ashvales believe they have won, Calem continued, his voice cutting through the howling with surgical precision. They believe they sit safely behind our walls, on our throne, holding our people hostage. They believe their poison and their politics have made them untouchable. He looked at Seren. She looked back. Through the bond, a single shared thought passed between them, wordless and absolute. Not anymore. We take back Arendelle before the sun touches the western wall, Calem commanded, and the Ashvales answer for every crime they have committed against my mate, my children, and my people. The army surged forward, and at its head, side by side, the Alpha King and the woman they had tried to destroy rode toward the city that had once treated her like a servant, and would never make that mistake again. The outer walls fell in minutes. Calem's wolves, fueled by months of pent-up rage and the primal imperative to protect their alpha's mate, overwhelmed the Ashvale defenders before the barricades could be fully manned. But as the fighting pushed deeper into the city, a rider broke through the chaos with a message that stopped Seren's heart. Lord Ashvale has sealed the citadel. The hostages are in the Great Hall. He says if the king enters, he will begin killing them immediately. One prisoner every minute until the king kneels and surrenders his crown. Seren found Calem at the citadel gates, held back by Dareth and 4 of his strongest wolves. The shield captain bore a fresh wound above her eye, but her grip on the king's arm had not weakened. You cannot go in, Dareth was saying through gritted teeth. It is a trap designed for you. The moment you cross that threshold, they will trigger the wards. Silver dust in the ventilation shafts, wolfsbane gas in the corridors. The citadel has been converted into a killing box. If I do nothing, 43 people die, Calem snarled. If you go in, 43 people die, and you die with them. And the Ashvales win everything. Seren stepped between them. Send me. Both Calem and Dareth turned to stare at her. The wards are designed to incapacitate wolves, Seren said, and the calm in her own voice surprised her. Silver dust, wolfsbane gas. Those target shifted wolves and wolves in human form. But I have never shifted. My wolf has never surfaced. To their wards, I will register as human. Absolutely not, Caleb said. You are carrying our children. I will not. You will not let 43 people die to protect me. And I will not let Helwyn die because I was too afraid to walk through a door. She placed her hand on his chest, feeling his heart hammering beneath her palm. The power I used at the tavern, whatever it is, it came from me and from the twins. It is not wolf magic, Caleb. It is something else. Something the Ashvales did not plan for because they do not know it exists. The bond pulsed between them, his terror, her resolve, and beneath it all, a current of trust so deep it had no bottom. I am not asking for permission, Seren said quietly. I am asking you to believe in me. Caleb stared at her for a long, agonized moment. Then he pressed his forehead to hers, his breath ragged. Come back to me, he whispered. Swear it. I swear it. She walked through the citadel gates alone. The wards did not trigger. The silver dust remained inert in its canisters above her head. The wolfsbane gas stayed sealed in its reservoirs along the corridor walls. Seren walked through the killing box that had been designed to destroy an Alpha King, and it did not so much as acknowledge her presence. She followed the sound of weeping to the great hall. The scene inside was a nightmare drawn in torchlight. 43 prisoners knelt in rows before the raised dais, their wrists bound with silver wire that had burned raw trenches into their skin. Armed Ashvale soldiers lined the walls, blades drawn. And on the throne, Caleb's throne, sat Lord Heron Ashvale, his hawkish face arranged in an expression of patient authority. Beside him stood Ravina, draped in a gown of white and silver, a thin circlet on her brow, playing queen, wearing the crown she had poisoned and schemed and humiliated to steal. At the front of the prisoner line, her wrists raw from silver wire, her white hair matted with sweat, knelt Helwyn. The old herb mistress raised her head and saw Seren. Her eyes widened, not with relief, but with horror. No, child, she breathed. Not you. Run. I am finished running. Seren turned to face Lord Ashvale. Release them. All of them. Now. Heron Ashvale studied her the way a collector might examine an unusual insect. The herbalist's ward. The king's little distraction. I must say, you are far less impressive in person than the trouble you have caused would suggest. And you are far less powerful than you believe, Seren replied. Your wards did not stop me. Your poison did not break the bond. Your assassins did not kill me. Every weapon you have aimed at me has failed, Lord Ashvale, and yet here you sit on a stolen chair, pretending you have won. Ravina stepped forward, her beautiful face twisted with contempt. Guards. Killer. 3 soldiers advanced. Seren did not retreat. She did not reach for the silver blade still tucked in her belt. Instead, she closed her eyes and reached inward, past the fear, past the exhaustion, down to the place where the bond hummed and the twins stirred and the strange, wild magic waited like a coiled spring. She opened her eyes. They were glowing, not the pale green of the tavern. This was something else, deeper, richer, shot through with veins of gold that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. The twins were awake inside her, their nascent power feeding hers, amplifying it, transforming the gentle healer's gift she had carried all her life into something vast and terrible and beautiful. The light exploded from her body. It swept through the great hall like a tide of liquid dawn, warm and blinding and irresistible. The soldiers were lifted off their feet and thrown against the walls like leaves in a gale. The silver wire binding the prisoners dissolved into metallic dust. The torches flared and died and reignited with flames that burned the color of emeralds. Ravenna screamed and threw herself behind the throne. Lord Ashvale drew a sword, the same kind of wolfsbane-coated blade the Quiet Ones had carried, and charged at Seren with the frenzied fury of a man who saw his life's work crumbling around him. The blade descended toward her. Seren caught it. Her bare hand closed around the poisoned steel and held it motionless. The wolfsbane coating sizzled against her skin, and she felt the burn. But it was distant, muffled, as though the pain belonged to someone else. The green-gold light pulsed brighter in her palm, and the blade began to crack. Hairline fractures spreading through the metal like ice breaking on a river in spring. The sword shattered. Lord Ashvale staggered backward, staring at the jagged hilt in his hand, then at the woman who had just broken a blade with her bare fingers. "That is not possible," he whispered. "You spent years engineering a plan to destroy a wolf." Seren's voice carried harmonics that resonated in every stone of the ancient hall. "You never considered what would happen if you threatened a mother." The citadel gates exploded inward. Calem's wolves flooded the hall, a tide of fur and fang and righteous fury. And at their head, in full wolf form, eyes blazing white, came the Alpha King himself. Seren stood in the center of the chaos, glowing like a star, surrounded by freed prisoners and broken weapons and the scattered remains of every scheme House Ashvale had ever woven. She caught Calem's blazing gaze across the hall, and smiled. Lord Heron Ashvale was dragged before the assembled wolves of Arendelle in chains forged from the same silver wire his soldiers had used to bind their prisoners. There was a particular justice in that, Seren thought, watching from the chair that had been placed beside Calem's reclaimed throne, a symmetry that needed no explanation. The trial was brief. Intercepted letters, testimony from the captured Quiet Ones, and the confession of the palace steward who had slipped the wolfsbane compound into Calem's wine laid the conspiracy bare. The drugging, the orchestrated humiliation, the assassins, the coup, planned regardless of whether Calem cooperated, because the Ashvales had never intended to share power. They had intended to replace the crown entirely. "Lord Heron Ashvale," Calem pronounced, his voice carrying across the hushed hall with the weight of a falling hammer. "You are found guilty of treason against the crown, of conspiracy to murder the true queen of Arendelle and the royal heirs, of the poisoning and violation of your sovereign king, and of the imprisonment and threatened murder of 43 innocent citizens of this realm." Lord Ashvale's composure finally cracked. He fell to his knees, his silver hair falling across his face, his thin hands clawing at the chains. "Mercy," he rasped. "I acted for the good of the kingdom. The bloodline needed strengthening. The girl is nobody. A common-born." "The girl," Calem said quietly, "is the woman who walked unarmed into your killing box, broke your weapons with her bare hands, and freed every prisoner you held without spilling a drop of blood. If that is nobody, Lord Ashvale, then I shudder to think what she will become." Ashvale met his fate at dawn. It was swift, swifter than he deserved. Some muttered, but Seren had asked for mercy where mercy was possible, and Calem had honored her request. Ravena's punishment was of a different kind. Stripped of her name, her house, and her wolf, severed from the pack bond by an ancient ritual, she was banished to the eastern marches, cast out to live as the very thing she had accused Seren of being. As the guards escorted her from the hall, Ravena turned and locked eyes with Seren. The hatred in her gaze was incandescent. "This is not over," she hissed. Seren met her gaze without flinching. "For you, it is." The weeks that followed were a slow exhale after a held breath. The kingdom mended. The crops that had withered during Calem's grief pushed green shoots through the thawing earth, as though the land itself could feel the bond strengthening. The feral wolves retreated to the deep forests, and the people of Arendelle began to breathe again. The court accepted Seren with a swiftness that surprised her. She had expected resistance, whispers about her common blood, sideways glances from nobles who believed the throne required a pedigree. Instead, she found something she had not anticipated: awe. The story of what she had done in the citadel had spread through the kingdom like wildfire. The common-born healer who had walked through a killing box designed for an alpha king, who had broken a poisoned blade with her bare hand, who had freed 43 prisoners with magic that no one could explain and no one could deny. They did not accept her despite her origins. They accepted her because of them. On a warm evening in late spring, when the first stars were beginning to appear above Arendel's ancient spires, Caleb led Seren to the forest chapel where they had first met in secret. The same clearing where he had first pressed his lips to her ribs and whispered that she was his. The same mossy stones where she had traced the lines of his face and believed, for the first time in her life, that she deserved to be loved. The bond should be completed, he said, standing before her in the dappled moonlight. Properly, with your full knowledge and full consent, no secrets, no shadows, no hiding. He tilted his head, baring the side of his throat to her. The ancient gesture of a wolf offering himself wholly to his mate. Claim me, Seren. Make me yours the way I have always been. From the moment I first saw you grinding herbs in the lower keep and forgot how to breathe. She stepped forward and pressed her mouth to the place where his neck met his shoulder. She felt his pulse thundering beneath her lips, felt the bond between them vibrating with anticipation, every thread pulled taut, waiting for the final note. Her teeth pressed into his skin and the bond sealed. The bond completed like a circuit closing. Light flooded through her, not the green-gold power of battle, but something softer, warmer, infinitely more intimate. She felt his soul pour into hers. Every memory, every fear, every moment of relentless searching laid bare without reservation. She saw the feast through his eyes, the horrible blankness, the puppet's movements, the void where his wolf should have been. She saw him wake, screaming her name. Saw him standing in her empty chamber, pressing her mother's bone-handled comb to his face, breathing in the last trace of her scent. She saw herself through his eyes. Not a servant, not a nobody. A woman of impossible courage, the mother of his children, the mate his soul had recognized before his mind had understood what it was seeing, and he saw himself through hers. Not the king who had failed her, but a man who had torn his world apart to find her, who had wept on his knees in a ruined tavern because she was alive, who loved her with a ferocity that transcended poison and politics and cruelty. When she pulled back, they were both trembling. "My queen," he breathed. "My king," she answered. 5 weeks later, on a morning soaked in golden light, Seren brought 2 children into the world, a boy with his father's black hair and a howl that rattled the windows of the royal chamber, a girl with her mother's quiet intensity and eyes that glowed pale green from the moment they opened. Caleb held his son in one arm and his daughter in the other, tears streaming freely down his face, making no effort whatsoever to hide them. "Thank you," he whispered to Seren, who lay exhausted and radiant among the pillows, "for fighting, for surviving, for choosing to trust me again when I had given you every reason not to." Seren reached up and touched the claiming mark on his throat, the silver scar that matched the one on her ribs, both healed now into something beautiful, permanent, unbreakable. "You waited outside my cottage," she said softly. "Before dawn, in the ruins of a tavern, wounded and weeping. That is when I knew." "Knew what?" "That you were worth the risk of believing again." Outside the window, the wolves of Arendelle lifted their voices in a chorus of joy that carried across the kingdom, from the White Ridge Pass to the Salt Flats, from the Ashwood to the Southern Sea. A celebration not of power or conquest, but of something far more rare, A bond that had been broken by treachery, forged again in fire, and sealed forever in the quiet, unshakable choice to love without condition. They had tried to make her a servant. She had become a queen. And the Alpha King, who had torn his kingdom apart to find her, would spend the rest of his days making sure she never doubted her crown again. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story.